At 30 years old, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and I called my parents crying for help. My dad said, "We cannot deal with this right now. Your sister is planning her wedding, so do not ruin it with your drama." I went through chemotherapy alone, vomiting in a cold apartment, while they threw a $50,000 party. 3 years later, I am cancer-free and wealthy. Last week, my dad called me crying because he had a stroke and needs a caregiver. My answer took exactly 4 words: call your wedding planner. Before I tell you how I delivered the ultimate karma, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally fought back. My name is Gabrielle Hill, and at 33 years old, I sat in my corner office overlooking the Washington, D.C. skyline. The ink was still wet on the $15 million merger contract I had just closed for my healthcare consulting firm. My assistant placed a crystal glass of sparkling water on my mahogany desk and quietly stepped out, leaving me in the silence of my success. I adjusted the sleeve of my silk blazer, feeling the cool air conditioning against my skin. This was the life I had built from the ashes, a life where I controlled every outcome, where no one could hurt me. But the vibration of my phone on the glass desk shattered the peace. I glanced at the screen. A number I did not save but recognized immediately. The area code was from my hometown in Georgia. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something cold settled in my stomach. I slid my finger across the screen and held the phone to my ear without speaking. "Gabrielle, is that you?" The voice on the other end was weak, slurred, and terrified. It was my father, Desmond Hill. The man who used to thunder from the pulpit every Sunday about righteousness and family values now sounded like a frightened child. "The insurance company refused to cover it, Gabby. They said my policy is too basic. They are kicking me out. They want to move me to the state charity ward. You have to help me. We are family." I listened to his heavy breathing. The word family hung in the air like a bad joke. I spun my chair around to look at the city below. My reflection in the glass looked perfect, untouchable, but I knew what lay beneath the expensive silk shirt. I raised a hand and touched the small round scar on my chest, the port scar, exactly where they used to pump poison into my veins to kill the cancer that my family ignored. The scar was a reminder that the only person who saved Gabrielle Hill was Gabrielle Hill. "They need $50,000 for the deposit, or they will put me on the street on a stretcher. You have money, right? We heard you were doing well. Please, baby girl. Daddy is scared." I closed my eyes, envisioning him lying in a hospital bed helpless, just like I had been 3 years ago. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. He wanted the daughter he abandoned to be his savior. He wanted the money I earned while he was bankrolling my sister's vanity project to save his life. Most people would hang up. Most people would scream. But I am not most people. I am a businesswoman, and I saw an opportunity for a transaction that had been overdue for 3 years. I opened my eyes and spoke calmly into the receiver. "Do not worry, Dad. You want me to come there? Fine. I will be there by tomorrow morning." I hung up before he could thank me. He thought I was coming with a checkbook. He had no idea I was coming to close the account forever. To understand why I felt absolutely no pity for the man who gave me life, you have to go back 3 years to the day my life almost ended. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of gray, rainy day that makes your bones ache. I was sitting in a sterile white room at Sloan Kettering, staring at a poster about nutrition while Dr. Evans arranged his papers. His face was kind, but his eyes held that look doctors get when they have bad news. "Gabrielle, the biopsy results confirm it. You have stage 3 lymphoma. The cancer is aggressive and has spread to your lymph nodes. We need to start chemotherapy immediately." It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. I was 30 years old. I was a fitness instructor. I ate kale salads and drank green smoothies. This was not supposed to happen to me. My hands started shaking so hard, I dropped my purse on the floor. Dr. Evans put a hand on my shoulder, asking if there was anyone he could call for me. I nodded, unable to speak. My family, my parents, They would know what to do. They would come up here and hold my hand. They would tell me it was going to be okay. I walked out into the hospital hallway dazed and dialed my mother's number. My mother, Patricia, was the matriarch, the glue of the family. Surely she would drop everything. I listened to the ringtone. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Finally, she picked up, but I could barely hear her over the noise in the background. There was classical music playing and the sound of champagne flutes clinking. Loud laughter echoed through the phone. "Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Mom, are you there?" "Oh, Gabby! Perfect timing!" Patricia shouted over the noise, sounding breathless with excitement. "We are at Vera Wang. You will not believe what Vanessa just tried on. It is exquisite. Silk organza with a 10-foot train. It cost $12,000, but for my baby girl's big day, only the best, right?" I felt bile rise in my throat. I leaned against the cold hospital wall, trying to find my balance. "Mom, please listen to me. I am at the doctor. I just got my results." "It is bad, Mom. It is cancer." I said the word and waited for the world to stop on her end. I waited for the gasp, the silence, the concern. Instead, I heard my sister Vanessa in the background squealing, "Oh my God, Mom, look at the veil. It sparkles like diamonds. Tell Gabby to hurry up so you can take a picture of me." Patricia let out a heavy, dramatic sigh into the phone, deeply annoyed. "Gabby, stop it. Seriously. You are always doing this, trying to be the center of attention whenever Vanessa has a moment. Do not bring that negative energy into this blessed day." "The doctor said I have lymphoma, Mom." I interrupted, my voice rising to a desperate pitch. "I need chemo. I am scared. I need you to come." Patricia clicked her tongue aggressively. "Look, we are very busy right now. The wedding is in 2 months and we have a schedule. Do not be dramatic. I am sure you can take a pill or something. We will talk later tonight. Do not call back right now, you are ruining the vibe." The line went dead. She hung up. She actually hung up. I stood there in the middle of the busy hospital corridor, clutching my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. People rushed past me, living their lives while mine had just shattered into a million pieces. My mother was looking at a $12,000 dress while her eldest daughter was staring at a death sentence. That was the moment Gabrielle Hill died, and the woman who would eventually destroy them was born. The drive to my parents' house felt like a funeral procession, even though I was the one driving. I had spent the last 24 hours organizing every single piece of paper related to my diagnosis. Pathology reports, insurance denial letters, and a terrifying spreadsheet estimating the out-of-pocket costs for the next 6 months. The total came to exactly $50,000. It was a staggering amount, but I knew my parents had it. They had been saving for retirement for 30 years, and my father always bragged about his prudent investments. Surely saving his daughter's life was worth dipping into the nest egg. When I walked through the double oak doors of the house, I grew up in the smell of rosemary roast beef, and expensive red wine hit me. It was a scent that used to mean comfort, but tonight it smelled like exclusion. They were already seated in the formal dining room. My mother had brought out the good china, the plates with the gold rim that we were forbidden from touching as children. Sitting at the head of the table in my father's usual spot was Chad Kensington. He looked every inch the golden boy my parents had always dreamed of welcoming into the family. Blonde hair perfectly gelled, a Patek Philippe watch glinting under the chandelier, and a smile that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "It is all about mindset, Desmond," Chad was saying, his voice booming as he swirled a glass of Pinot Noir that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "The market rewards the bold. Poor people stay poor because they lack the discipline to leverage their assets. They want handouts instead of opportunities. It is a tragedy, really, but it is the natural order of things." My father nodded enthusiastically, hanging on Chad's every word like it was gospel. "Amen to that, son. That is exactly what I preach to my congregation. Faith without work is dead, and poverty is often just a symptom of a lazy spirit. I stood in the archway, clutching my heavy binder of medical records against my chest, feeling like an intruder in my own home. My sister Vanessa was the first to notice me. She didn't smile. She just flicked her eyes up and down my rain-soaked coat. "You are late," Vanessa said, popping a piece of roasted potato into her mouth. "And you are dripping water on the hardwood." Chad hates it when people are punctual challenged. It shows a lack of respect for other people's time. "Hello to you too, Vanessa," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I walked to the table and pulled out the empty chair opposite Chad. I didn't take off my coat, I didn't reach for a napkin. I simply placed the thick black binder onto the pristine white tablecloth with a heavy thud. The sound silenced the room. "What is this?" my mother asked, looking at the binder as if it were a dead rat. "We are eating, Gabrielle. Do not put your work clutter on the table." "It is not work, Mom. It is my life," I said, looking directly at my father. "I told you on the phone, the cancer is aggressive. The insurance covers the basics, but the copays, the specialized medication, and the supportive care. It is $50,000. I need help. I need a loan." The silence that followed was suffocating. Chad took a slow sip of his wine, looking at me with mild amusement as if I were a beggar on the street asking for change. My father slowly placed his knife and fork down, lining them up perfectly parallel to each other. He cleared his throat the same way he did before delivering a sermon on sacrifice. "Gabrielle," he began, his voice taking on that deep pastoral tone that used to make me feel safe. "We love you, you know that. But you have to understand the position we are in right now. The timing, well, it is simply impossible." "Impossible," I repeated, my hands trembling. "Dad, you have $300,000 in your retirement account. I saw the statements when I helped you with taxes last year. I am not asking for a gift. I will pay you back every cent once I am well." My father sighed, looking pained. He glanced at Chad, then at Vanessa, and finally back at me. "That money is already allocated, Gabrielle. We have liquidated a significant portion of the portfolio to finance the wedding." I felt the blood drain from my face. You cashed out your retirement for a party." "It is not just a party." My father snapped, his patience fraying. "Do not be reductive. This is the union of the Hill and Kensington families. Do you have any idea what this alliance means for us? For our standing in the community? The Kensingtons are old money, Gabrielle. We have to match their contribution. We have to show that we belong in their world. We promised Vanessa the wedding of the century, and a promise made before God is binding." "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You are spending my treatment money on centerpieces and a DJ." Chad chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Technically, it is an 8-piece orchestra, not a DJ. Quality costs money, Gabrielle. You should understand that. If you had managed your own finances better, perhaps invested in high-yield bonds instead of whatever it is you do, you wouldn't be in this desperate position. It is uncomfortable for everyone when you bring your personal failures to the dinner table." I looked at my mother, pleading silently. "Mom, are you hearing this? I could die. Without this treatment, the survival rate drops to 30%. My mother refused to meet my eyes. She picked up her wine glass, focusing intently on the red liquid. "Your father is right, Gabby. We have already signed the contracts with the vendors. The venue alone was $60,000. We cannot just ask for a refund because you got sick. It does not work that way. Besides..." She paused, finally looking at me with a gaze that was terrifyingly empty. "God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. Maybe this is his way of testing your faith. You have drifted from the church lately. Maybe you need to pray more and beg less." And I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They were using God to justify their greed. They were wrapping their narcissism in scripture. Then Vanessa spoke up. She had been quiet, watching the exchange like it was a tennis match. But now she leaned forward, her face twisted in annoyance. Honestly, Gabby, you are being so incredibly selfish. Do you have any idea how much stress I am under? My dress fitting is tomorrow. The seating chart is a nightmare, and now you come here trying to guilt trip mom and dad. She pointed a manicured finger at the binder. You want to take my flower budget? That is what you are asking for. You want to drain the account we set aside for the imported white orchids just to pump chemicals into your veins that are going to make your hair fall out anyway? You are going to look sick and bald in the photos regardless. Why do you have to ruin the financial side of it too? Vanessa, I am your sister. I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hard realization. I am talking about staying alive. And I am talking about my future, Vanessa screamed, slamming her hand on the table. This wedding is my future. Chad is my future. You are just being dramatic and jealous because you are 30 and single and sick. Go figure it out yourself. Go start a GoFundMe or something. Just leave our money alone. My father picked up his knife and fork again, signaling that the conversation was over. You heard your sister, Gabrielle. We have made our decision. The wedding takes priority. It is what is best for the family legacy. Now, if you are going to stay for dinner, please wash your hands. You look clammy, and we do not want to catch whatever you have. I stood there for one more second, memorizing the scene. The glint of the chandelier, the smug look on Chad's face, the cold indifference in my mother's eyes, the pure malice in Vanessa's. Enjoy your dinner, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I hope the orchids are worth it. I turned around and walked out. I left the heavy binder on the table right next to the roast beef. I wanted them to have to look at it. I wanted my medical reality to sit there while they ate their expensive meal. As I closed the heavy front door behind me, shutting out the warmth and the light, I stood alone in the dark, cold rain. I had no money. I had no support. But as I walked to my car, I felt something shift inside me. The Gabrielle who sought their approval had died at that dinner table. And in the darkness, something fierce began to take root. They wouldn't help me survive. Fine. I would survive to spite them. And one day I would buy and sell their precious legacy without blinking an eye. The first round of chemotherapy feels like someone is pouring liquid ice directly into your veins. It leaves a metallic taste in your mouth that no amount of water can wash away. I sat in the recovery chair for 4 hours, watching the poison drip into my system, counting the drops just to keep my mind from snapping. The nurse, a kind woman named Brenda, came over to check my vitals. She told me I was done for the day, but per hospital policy I could not leave alone. I needed a caretaker to sign me out and drive me home because the medication could cause sudden fainting or disorientation. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6 in the evening. Outside, the November sky had turned a bruised purple, and a mix of freezing rain and snow was beginning to coat the streets of Atlanta. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were trembling, partly from the cold and partly from the chemicals racing through my body. I dialed my mother first. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed my father. Voicemail. I knew exactly where they were. They were at the Oakwood Country Club hosting the engagement party of the century for Vanessa and Chad. I imagined the scene vividly. My mother holding a crystal champagne flute, laughing at a joke Chad made. My father boasting about the merger of two powerful families. The warm golden light of the chandeliers bouncing off the diamonds on Vanessa's finger. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a sterile room that smelled of rubbing alcohol and sickness, shivering in a thin cardigan because I had sold my winter coat 2 weeks ago to pay for my copay. I had no choice. I dialed Vanessa. She picked up on the last ring, her voice sharp and annoyed. Gabrielle, why are you calling me right now? I am literally in the middle of a toast. I need a ride, I whispered, my voice raspy. The hospital won't let me leave without a family member. Mom and Dad aren't answering. Please, Vanessa. I just finished my first round. I feel sick. There was a heavy sigh on the other end, followed by the sound of hushed whispering. You have got to be kidding me. You are ruining my night. You know that Chad is going to be so pissed if I leave. I am sorry, I said, hating myself for apologizing. Please. Fine, she snapped. I will come get you. But you better be waiting outside. I am not parking and coming in. I do not have time for that. The line went dead. I thanked the nurse, signed the discharge papers with a shaky hand, and began the long walk to the entrance. Every step felt like walking through molasses. My bones ached. My head was spinning. When I finally pushed through the automatic doors, the cold air hit me like a physical slap. The sleet was coming down harder now, stinging my face. I stood on the curb for 20 minutes, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. Finally, I saw it. Chad's white BMW X5 turned the corner. It was a beautiful machine, pristine and gleaming under the streetlights. It pulled up to the curb, but the window didn't roll down. The doors didn't unlock. I reached for the handle of the passenger seat, but it was locked. I peered through the tinted glass. Vanessa was sitting in the driver's seat, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror. She was wearing a white cashmere coat that looked softer than anything I had ever touched. She finally cracked the window about an inch. I am not unlocking it yet, she said, her voice muffled by the glass. Walk around to the trunk. There is a stack of old newspapers. Get them. What? I asked, confused, shivering violently. Vanessa, please let me in. It is freezing. Just do it, Gabrielle, she ordered. I am not having you ruin Chad's Italian leather seats. You have been in a hospital all day. God knows what kind of germs or radiation or whatever you have on you. Get the papers. I stared at her. My own sister. She was worried about germs on a car seat while I was fighting for my life. But I was too weak to argue. I walked to the back of the car, popped the trunk, and found a stack of Wall Street journals. I grabbed them, feeling the wet snow soaking through my thin shoes. I walked back to the passenger door. Vanessa unlocked the door. I opened it, grateful for the rush of warm air from the heater. But before I could sit, she put a hand out to stop me. Spread them out, she commanded. Cover the whole seat, and the backrest too. I do not want your clothes touching the leather. I stood there, humiliated, tears mixing with the sleet on my cheeks. I carefully laid out the newspapers over the pristine tan leather, arranging them so not an inch of the seat was exposed. It felt like I was preparing a cage for a dirty animal. Only when the seat was fully covered did she allow me to sit down. The moment I closed the door, she sped off, the tires screeching on the wet pavement. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask what the doctor said. She immediately turned up the radio, blasting pop music that made my headache explode. You owe me big time for this, Vanessa said, glancing at me with disgust as I huddled into myself, trying to get warm. I had to leave right before the cake cutting. Chad was furious. He said it looks bad for the bride to disappear. I am sorry, I murmured again, closing my eyes. Thank you for coming. Do not touch anything, she warned, noticing my hand resting on the door handle. Your hands look clammy. Just keep them in your lap. Chad just had this car detailed yesterday. It cost $300. $300, I repeated softly. That was the exact cost of the anti-nausea medication I couldn't afford to buy at the pharmacy earlier. Yeah, well, image is everything, Vanessa said, adjusting the heat on her side of the car while leaving my side cold. We have a reputation to uphold. Speaking of which, Mom said you are not allowed to post any photos of yourself looking like this on Facebook. We do not want people asking questions during the wedding season. It is depressing. I looked down at the newspaper beneath me. The headline on the page under my leg read something about a market crash, but my own world had already crashed. I was sitting on trash, treated like trash by the person who shared my DNA. The smell of her expensive perfume. Chanel No. 5 was overwhelming in the closed car. It mixed with the smell of the wet newspaper and my own fear, making my stomach turn. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to vomit. I knew if I got sick in this car, she would leave me on the side of the highway. So I sat perfectly still, a statue of misery, while my sister hummed along to the radio, dreaming of her perfect wedding, completely indifferent to the fact that she was driving a ghost home. That ride was only 20 minutes long, but it broke the last thread of love I had for her. When she dropped me off at my dark, cold apartment building, she didn't wait to see if I made it inside safely. She just sped away back to her party, back to the light, leaving me in the dark, with nothing but the metallic taste of poison in my mouth. 2 weeks after the engagement party, I started losing pieces of myself. Literally. It began in the shower. I was washing my hair, trying to be gentle, when I felt a heavy, wet mass slide down my back. I looked down at my hands and screamed. A clump of my dark curls, the size of a fist, was tangled in my fingers. I shut off the water and stepped out, shivering in the cold air of my drafty apartment. I looked in the fogged mirror. There were patches of scalp, visible now pale and vulnerable against the remaining dark strands. I looked like a ghost. My cheekbones were jutting out too sharp, my skin was gray, and there were dark purple circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I was 30 years old, but I looked like I was 90 and fading fast. I wrapped a scarf around my head, trying to hide the damage, when I heard a sharp knock at the door. My heart leaped. I had texted my mother earlier that morning, telling her the side effects were getting bad and that I was scared. Maybe she had come. Maybe she had brought soup. Maybe, just maybe, she was going to be a mother. I opened the door. Patricia Hill stood there. She looked immaculate in a camel-colored cashmere coat and leather gloves, holding a designer purse that cost more than my car. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was. She stepped into my small one-bedroom apartment and wrinkled her nose immediately, as if she had walked into a public restroom. "It smells like medicine in here, Gabrielle," she said, leaving the door slightly ajar behind her, as if she needed an escape route. "And it is freezing. Why don't you turn the heat up?" "I am saving on the electric bill, Mom," I said, my voice weak. I sat down on my worn-out sofa, pulling a blanket around my shoulders. "I didn't expect you to come. Thank you. I really needed someone today. The hair loss started, and it is—" "Yes, well, that is actually why I am here," she interrupted, refusing to sit down. She stood in the center of the living room, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked at my head wrapped in the scarf and then at my face. Her expression wasn't pity, it was calculation. She was looking at me like a contractor looking at a broken tile that needed to be replaced. "We need to talk about the wedding, Gabrielle." I blinked, confused. "The wedding, Mom, I can barely stand up. Can we talk about that later?" "No, we cannot," she said sharply. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, and we have a problem, a visual problem." She gestured vaguely at my entire body. "Chad's mother, Mrs. Kensington, saw you at the engagement party. She was concerned. She thinks your appearance is disturbing. She said you look like Death, Gabrielle. And quite frankly, she is right." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the apartment temperature. "I have cancer, Mom. I am supposed to look sick. I am fighting for my life." "Stop being so dramatic," she snapped. "This is not about you. This is about the aesthetic of the event. We are spending $200,000 on this wedding. It is going to be in the society pages. The theme is Eternal Spring. It is about life bloom beauty. And you—" She paused, looking me up and down with disdain. "You are the opposite of that right now. You are decay." I couldn't breathe. My own mother was calling me decay. "So what are you saying?" I whispered. "We have made a decision," she said, her voice businesslike. "You cannot be the maid of honor. In fact, you cannot be a bridesmaid at all. We are replacing you with Chad's cousin Tiffany. She is blonde, healthy, and fits into the sample-size dress perfectly. You are kicking me out of the bridal party." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. "But I am your daughter. I am Vanessa's sister." "It gets worse, Gabrielle," she continued, not missing a beat. "We also think it is best if you do not attend the wedding at all." The room went silent. The only sound was the dripping of the faucet in the kitchen. "You are uninviting me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It is for the best. she said, smoothing out her coat. Think about it. You will be bald by then, people will stare, they will whisper, they will feel sorry for you instead of focusing on Vanessa. It brings a bad energy to the union. It is bad luck, really. The Kensingtons are very superstitious about illness. They think it is an omen. We cannot risk bad luck on such an important merger. She called it a merger, not a marriage. A merger. I am your child, I choked out. I could die, Mom, and you are worried about bad luck. Oh, stop it! She waved her hand dismissively. You are not going to die. You are just going through a rough patch. But we cannot let your rough patch ruin the most important day of our lives. We have worked too hard for this social standing to let your cancer drag us down. She finally opened her purse. For a split second, a foolish part of me thought she was going to pull out a check for the $50,000 I needed. Or maybe cash for groceries. She pulled out a checkbook, uncapped a gold pen, and wrote something quickly. She tore the check out with a crisp ripping sound and held it out to me. I took it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely read the numbers. $200. What is this? I asked, looking up at her. Consider it a gift, she said, snapping her purse shut. For your medicines. Or maybe buy a nice wig. Something that looks natural. Just because you are sick doesn't mean you have to look homeless. We want you to be comfortable, but please do not call us for a while. The next few weeks are going to be chaotic with the final fittings and the rehearsal dinner. We will not have time to deal with your mood swings. $200, I repeated, staring at the paper. Mom, my anti-nausea medication alone is $300. The scan next week is $2,000. You just spent $12,000 on a dress. And that dress is an investment, she shouted, losing her composure for the first time. Why do you always have to make everything about money? You are so ungrateful. We fed you, clothed, you put you through college, and this is how you repay us, by getting sick at the worst possible time and trying to guilt us. Take the money and be quiet. She turned around and walked to the door. She didn't look back. She didn't say, I love you. She didn't say, get well soon. Do not come to the house, Gabrielle, she said as she stepped into the hallway. Chad is allergic to stress, and your presence is very stressful right now. We will send you some photos of the wedding after it is over. The door clicked shut. I sat there for a long time holding the check. $200. That was the price they put on me. That was the severance package for being their daughter. I looked at the signature line. Patricia Hill. The loops of the letters were perfect, elegant, devoid of any emotion. I stood up slowly, my legs wobbling. I walked to the kitchen counter where I kept a box of matches for lighting candles when the power got cut off. I struck a match. The flame flared up bright and hot. I held the check over the sink and touched the flame to the corner of the paper. I watched as the blue ink turned black, then gray ash. I watched my mother's signature curl up and disappear. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. As the last piece of the check turned to ash and washed down the drain, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, replacing the fear. They wanted me to be invisible fine. I would disappear. I would vanish so completely they would forget I existed. And while they were celebrating their eternal spring, I would survive my winter alone. But seasons change. And when my summer came, I would burn their world down with the same indifference they showed me today. I went into the bathroom, picked up my husband's old razor, and shaved the rest of my hair off. I looked in the mirror at the stranger staring back. She was bald, she was broke, she was alone, but she was free. The eviction notice taped to my door was bright neon pink, a cheerful color for a devastating message. It gave me 72 hours to vacate the premises for non-payment of rent. I stood in the hallway of my apartment building, clutching a bag of generic saltine crackers, which was the only dinner I could afford, and stared at the paper until the words blurred together. I had no family to call. I had no savings left. My bank account was overdrawn by $40. because of an automatic subscription fee I had forgotten to cancel. The next 3 days were a blur of humiliation. I sold my laptop, the one I used to build my career at a pawn shop, for $200. I sold my designer clothes, the remnants of my former life, to a consignment store for pennies on the dollar. But the hardest part was selling my car. It was an old Honda Civic, reliable and safe, my last connection to independence. The used car salesman smelled the desperation on me like cheap perfume. He walked around the car, kicking the tires, shaking his head at imaginary scratches. He offered me $1,200. I knew it was worth 3 times that. But I had rent arrears to pay if I wanted to avoid a lawsuit, and I needed cash for food. I took the money, signed the title with a shaking hand, and walked away. That night, I packed my remaining belongings into 2 suitcases. I left my furniture behind. I took a bus to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, a place where the sheets smelled like stale cigarette smoke and the locks looked flimsy. I paid for a week in advance. After that, I didn't know where I would go. Maybe a shelter, maybe under a bridge. The reality of my situation hit me harder than the chemotherapy drugs. I was 30 years old, college educated, and I was effectively homeless because my own parents chose a wedding over my life. 2 days later, I took 3 city buses to get to the cancer center for my treatment. I was exhausted before I even sat in the infusion chair. The nausea was constant now, a low-grade hum in the background of my existence. But worse than the nausea was the hunger. I hadn't eaten a real meal in 4 days. I was surviving on water and crackers. As the nurse hooked up my IV, my stomach let out a loud growling roar that echoed in the quiet room. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear. Tears leaked out, hot and shameful. I tried to muffle the sound with my arm, but my body betrayed me again, growling louder. "Hey!" The voice was soft, accented, and kind. I opened my eyes. Standing over me was a nurse I hadn't met before. Her name tag read Elena. She was a short, curvy Latina woman with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't looking at my chart, she was looking at me. "You hungry, Mama?" she asked quietly. I tried to shake my head to maintain some shred of dignity, but I couldn't lie. "I am okay," I whispered. "I just forgot to eat breakfast." Elena didn't buy it. She looked at my worn-out shoes, my pale face, the way my clothes hung loosely on my shrinking frame. She checked the monitors, then pulled up a chair and sat close to me, lowering her voice. "My shift just ended," she said. "And my abuela made way too much food for me today. Arroz con pollo, chicken and rice. It is warm. You want some?" Before I could answer, she pulled a Tupperware container out of her bag. She popped the lid, and the smell of roasted chicken, garlic, and spices filled the air. It smelled like heaven. It smelled like home, or at least what home was supposed to feel like. "Please," I choked out. "I can't pay you." "Did I ask for money?" Elena scolded gently. She handed me a plastic fork. "Eat. You need strength to fight this beast." I took the first bite and I almost sobbed. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. Elena sat with me while I ate, telling me about her 2 kids, her ex-husband, who was a deadbeat, and how she worked double shifts to keep them in a good school. She was struggling, just like me, living paycheck to paycheck, yet she was feeding a stranger. She was more family to me in 10 minutes than my blood relatives had been in 30 years. When I finished, Elena looked at me seriously. "Where are you staying, Gabrielle? And do not lie to me. I have been a nurse for 20 years. I know a homeless patient when I see one." I told her about the motel. I told her about the eviction. I told her about the $200 check my mother gave me. Elena shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger. "That is not right. Listen to me. I have a pull-out sofa in my living room. It is not the Ritz, and my kids are loud, but it is clean and it is warm. You come stay with us for a few days until you get back on your feet. No arguing." That night, lying on Elena's sofa, listening to the soft sounds of her children sleeping in the next room, I felt safe for the first time in months. I pulled out my phone, connecting to Elena's Wi-Fi. I knew I shouldn't do it. I knew it was emotional self-harm, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened Instagram and went to Vanessa's profile. There it was. A new post from 2 hours ago. Vanessa was standing on a white sand beach wearing a white bikini that probably cost more than Elena's monthly salary. The water behind her was a turquoise so bright it looked fake. She was holding a coconut with a little umbrella in it, smiling her perfect veneered smile. The location tag read, "The Maldives." I scrolled to the caption, "Pre-wedding getaway with my hubby-to-be. So blessed to take a week off from the wedding planning stress. Life is beautiful when you focus on the positive hashtag Maldives, hashtag bride-to-be, hashtag blessed, hashtag luxury travel." I did a quick Google search. The resort she was tagged in cost $2,000 a night. The flight alone was $5,000. The entire trip was easily $30,000. $30,000. That was 6 months of my rent. That was my entire chemotherapy bill. That was a reliable car. That was food. That was life. While I was eating charity chicken from a nurse I just met, sleeping on a stranger's couch, because I had nowhere else to go, my sister was drinking cocktails on a private island paid for by the parents who told me they were broke. I looked at the photo, zooming in on Vanessa's carefree face. I didn't feel sad anymore. The sadness evaporated, burned away by a white-hot rage that settled deep in my gut, stronger than the cancer, stronger than the chemo. I took a screenshot of the photo. Then I took a screenshot of the eviction notice I had saved on my phone. I put them side by side in a hidden folder on my phone titled Fuel. I stared at the ceiling of Elena's living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I made a vow to the universe, to God, and to myself. I will not die on this sofa. I will not let this disease take me. I will survive. I will claw my way back from this abyss. I will work harder than anyone has ever worked. I will build an empire so large that their little country club life looks like a dollhouse. And when I am standing on top of the world looking down at them, I will make them pay for every single cracker I had to eat for dinner. I will make them regret every dollar they spent on that island while I was shivering in the cold. They wanted to cut me off, fine. I was cut off. But they forgot that when you cut off a branch, sometimes the roots grow deeper, stronger, and more twisted in the dark. I was done being the victim. The Gabrielle they knew was dead. The woman who woke up on Elena's sofa the next morning was a soldier, and she was already planning her war. The weeks that followed my eviction were a blur of nausea, exhaustion, and the kind of deep, bone-chilling fear that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning. I was sleeping on Elena's pull-out sofa, a lumpy piece of furniture that smelled of lavender detergent and her children's snacks. Every morning, I watched Elena count out singles and quarters on the kitchen counter to pay for the bus fare, her face tight with the stress of supporting 2 kids and a sick stranger on a nurse's salary. The guilt ate at me faster than the cancer. I felt like a parasite. But while my body was failing, my mind was sharpening. It was the only thing I had left that still worked. I spent my days at the infusion center, hooked up to the IV, staring at the stack of insurance denial letters that other patients had left behind in the waiting room trash or on the tables. It became an obsession. I was a healthcare policy consultant in my former life. I knew the system was broken, but seeing it from the patient's side revealed just how criminal it was. I started noticing a pattern. Dozens of claims for essential chemotherapy drugs were being rejected under a specific obscure code. Error 404-B. It was a generic denial based on a formatting mismatch between the hospital's new billing software and the insurance company's legacy servers. It wasn't a medical decision, it was a coding glitch, and it was costing people their lives. One afternoon, while Elena was working a double shift, I borrowed her old cracked Toshiba laptop. The fan whirred like a jet engine, and the E key stuck every time I pressed it, but it connected to the internet. That was all I needed. I sat in the chemo chair, ignoring the metallic taste in my mouth, and I started to code. I wasn't a software engineer by trade, but I knew data. I wrote a simple script designed to scan patient billing records, identify the error 404-B mismatch, and automatically reformat the claim to bypass the rejection filter. It was a digital key to unlock the doors that the insurance companies had slammed shut. I tested it first on Mr. Henderson, an elderly man who sat across from me on Tuesdays. He had been denied coverage for a heart medication that cost $6,000 a month. He was weeping quietly into a handkerchief because he had decided to stop treatment so his wife wouldn't lose their house. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice raspy, "give me your file." He handed it over, confused. I ran his data through my script. It took 10 minutes. I submitted the appeal directly through the portal. 2 days later, Mr. Henderson came into the clinic. He wasn't walking. He was practically dancing. He waved a letter in the air, tears streaming down his face. "They approved it," he shouted, hugging the nurses. "They approved the whole year, $100,000 in coverage. It's a miracle." It wasn't a miracle. It was an algorithm. And I knew I was sitting on a gold mine. News spread through the ward like wildfire. The bald girl in chair 4 could fix your insurance problems. I helped 3 more patients that week. Then a doctor noticed. Then the hospital administrator. Finally, a representative from a mid-sized health tech firm in Silicon Valley reached out. They heard about the patch I had written. They wanted to buy the source code. The negotiation happened right there in the infusion center. The rep, a guy in a sharp suit named David, looked uncomfortable sitting next to my IV pole. He offered me $50,000. I laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "David," I said, leaning back and adjusting my beanie. "I just recovered $500,000 for this hospital in 3 days, using a laptop that is missing the F4 key. You are going to save millions in administrative costs. Add a zero or I sell it to your competitor tomorrow." He stared at me. He saw a sick woman, but he heard a shark. 500,000, he agreed. For exclusive rights. The contract was signed digitally an hour later. The notification hit my bank account the next morning. $500,000. I stared at the screen, at the commas and the zeros. It was more money than my parents had saved in 30 years. It was 20 times the amount I had begged them for. I looked around Elena's small living room at her frayed curtains and the stack of bills on her counter. The first thing I did was pay off Elena's mortgage anonymously. I told her it was a clerical error at the bank, a grant for essential workers. She cried for 2 days. I never told her it was me. But the biggest victory wasn't the money. It was the news that came 2 weeks later. Dr. Evans walked into my room holding a clipboard, a smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "Gabrielle," he said, "we got the PET scan results back. There is no evidence of active disease. You are in remission." Remission. The word tasted sweeter than champagne. I was alive, I was rich, and I was free. I sat in my car, a new modest sedan I had bought with cash, parked a block away from my parents' house later that week. I watched them come out the front door. They looked happy, relieved even. They thought the problem of their sick daughter had simply faded away into the background. They thought I was probably dead or rotting in a state facility, no longer a stain on their perfect image. I picked up my phone to call them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I had $500,000 in the bank and a clean bill of health. I wanted to drive up the driveway and throw bundles of cash at their feet just to watch them scramble. But then I stopped. If I told them I was okay, if I told them I was successful, they would welcome me back. Not because they loved me, but because I was useful again. They would want to borrow money. They would want me to buy gifts for the wedding. They would pretend the abandonment never happened. No, that was too easy. I put the phone down. I realized that the greatest weapon I had was their own prejudice. They thought I was a failure, fine. I would be a failure. They thought I was weak. I would be invisible. I would let them continue their shallow, debt-ridden lives while I built an empire in the shadows. I would become a ghost in their lives, watching, waiting, and growing stronger every day. I drove away without looking back. I rented a luxury apartment in the city under an LLC name. I started my own consulting firm using the capital from the software sale. I hired a team. I worked 18 hours a day, fueled by a mixture of gratitude for my life and a cold, hard desire for justice. I blocked their numbers. I stayed off social media. To the world, Gabrielle Hill had vanished. But in the boardrooms of DC, a new player had arrived, and she was playing for keeps. My silence was not a surrender. It was a strategy. And 3 years later, when my father's name crossed my desk on a rejected insurance claim, I knew the game was finally entering its end stage. The date was February 14th, Valentine's Day, because of course Vanessa needed her wedding to monopolize the most romantic day of the year. I sat in my small, temporary apartment, the one I had rented while I looked for a permanent luxury condo. My laptop screen glowed in the dim light, casting long shadows across my face. I had created a fake Facebook profile under the name, distinctively generic, something like Susan Smith, just to watch the live stream. My mother had made the event public naturally. She wanted the envy of the entire congregation, not just the 300 guests in attendance. The feed went live at 6 o'clock sharp. The venue was the Botanical Gardens transformed into what my mother had called eternal spring. I had to admit, visually it was stunning. There were arches made entirely of imported white orchids, thousands of them cascading down like waterfalls. I did the math in my head instantly. Those flowers alone cost $40,000. That was my chemotherapy. That was my anti-nausea medication. That was my rent for 2 years. They were trampling on my survival with every step they took down that aisle. The ceremony was a blur of performative weeping and designer silk, but the real show began at the reception. The camera angle was fixed on the head table, but the audio was surprisingly crisp, picking up conversations it probably wasn't meant to. My father Desmond stood up for his toast. He looked older, tired, but he had that familiar gleam in his eye, the one he got when he had a captive audience. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the ballroom. Friends, family, and distinguished guests, he began, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Today, my heart is overflowing. The Bible tells us that love is patient and love is kind, and looking at my beautiful daughter Vanessa and her husband Chad, I see the embodiment of God's grace. We have sacrificed so much to make this day possible. We have given everything we have, quite literally, to ensure that this union starts on the perfect foundation. He wiped a tear from his eye. I stared at the screen, stone cold. He wasn't lying. He had given everything. He had given my life savings. He had given my safety. He had sacrificed his firstborn child on the altar of his ego. He continued, raising his glass. To family. To the bonds that can never be broken. We Hills stick together through sickness and in health. I almost laughed out loud. Through sickness, the audacity was breathtaking. He was preaching about sticking together while I had spent the last 6 months alone in an infusion chair. The camera panned to the crowd for applause, and for a brief second, it caught Chad. He wasn't looking at Vanessa. He was leaning over to one of his groomsmen, a guy who looked just as smug and wealthy as he did. The microphone on the podium was far away, but the videographer was walking past Chad's table with a boom mic capturing the ambient noise. I turned the volume up to maximum. Finally, Chad muttered, loosening his tie. I thought the old man would never shut up. God, these people love the sound of their own voices. His friend laughed and whispered back, at least the party is decent. The food looks expensive. Chad sneered, taking a heavy swig of scotch. It better be. They spent every dime they had on it. I checked their financials before the prenup. They are tapped out. The old man thinks this wedding buys him access to my dad's country club, but he is dreaming. I am not carrying a bunch of broke gold diggers. Once the honeymoon is over, the boundaries go up. I sat back in my chair. So Chad knew. He knew they were broke. He knew they were desperate climbers. And he despised them for it. My parents had sold their souls to marry into a family that viewed them as trash. Then the camera swung back to the dance floor. Vanessa was there. She had changed into her second dress of the night, a sparkly mini dress that cost $5,000. She was clearly intoxicated. She was holding a half-empty bottle of champagne by the neck, swaying dangerously. A young waiter, probably a college student working for tuition, accidentally bumped into the train of her dress as he tried to clear a table. Vanessa spun around, her face twisting into a mask of pure rage. She didn't just yell. She lunged. "You idiot!" she screamed, her voice shrill and slurring. "Do you know how much this costs? You ruined it. You are clumsy. Just like my useless sister. Get out of my sight." She shoved the waiter hard. He stumbled back, dropping a tray of glasses. They shattered on the dance floor. The music stopped. The room went silent. My mother rushed onto the dance floor, not to apologize to the waiter, but to grab Vanessa's arm and hiss at her to smile for the cameras. That was it. That was the moment. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing. They were a circus, a loud, expensive, miserable circus, and I was no longer a clown in their show. I was the audience, and I was bored. I closed the browser tab, cutting off the image of Vanessa screaming. The silence in my apartment returned, but this time it felt peaceful. It felt clean. I opened a new tab and logged into my bank account. The balance from the software sale sat there, glorious and heavy. $500,000. I navigated to the transfer section. I typed in a routing number I had memorized weeks ago. It belonged to Elena, the nurse who had fed me when I was starving, who had given me a couch when I was homeless. She had told me once that her dream was to open a small bakery to make the pastries her grandmother used to make in Puerto Rico, but she could never save enough for the industrial ovens. I typed in the amount, $50,000. The exact amount I had needed to save my life. The exact amount my parents had refused to give me. I added a note to the transfer. For the ovens. Do not ask questions, just bake. Love, the girl on the couch. I hovered my finger over the enter key. $50,000 was a lot of money. It was a luxury car. It was a down payment on a house. But for me, it was the price of my soul. By giving it away to someone who actually deserved it, I was purifying the money. I was taking the toxicity of my family's greed and turning it into something nourishing. I pressed send. The screen flashed. Transfer complete. Somewhere in the city, Elena's phone would ding with a notification that would change her life forever. She would cry, she would panic. Then she would realize she was free. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. My parents had their wedding. My sister had her rich husband who hated her. My father had his fake legacy. But I had my life. I had my dignity. And I had the knowledge that while they were dancing on the edge of a cliff, I was building a bridge to a future they could not even imagine. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it. It tasted better than any champagne they were serving tonight. The wedding was over. My life had just begun. 3 years. That is 1,095 days. That is how long it took for the wheel of fortune to turn completely upside down. Time is a cruel master but an excellent accountant. It balances every ledger eventually. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse apartment in downtown Washington, D.C., watching the sun rise over the Potomac River. The morning air was crisp, but I felt warm in my silk robe, holding a cup of espresso made from beans that cost $60 a pound. My life was quiet now. It was a curated fortress of peace and immense wealth. My consulting firm had expanded into 3 states. My investment portfolio, managed by the best sharks in New York, was growing faster than I could spend it. I was no longer the sick bald girl begging for help. I was Gabrielle Hill, the woman who signed checks, not the one who cashed them. But across the state line, back in the town I used to call home, the picture was very different. I knew this because I had made it my business to know. I didn't contact them, but I watched. I watched them the way a scientist watches bacteria in a petri dish. My parents, Desmond and Patricia, were waking up to a reality they never expected. The sprawling colonial house with the manicured lawn and the heated pool was gone. It had been sold 18 months ago. They told their friends they were downsizing because the big house was too empty without the children. That was a lie. They sold it because the wedding debt had swallowed them whole. The second mortgage they took out to pay for the imported orchids and the 5-course steak dinner had defaulted. To avoid foreclosure and public humiliation, they sold the family legacy for pennies on the dollar. Now they lived in a 2-bedroom rental in a complex near the highway. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled of the previous tenant's cigarettes, and instead of waking up to the sound of birds chirping in their private garden, my mother woke up to the sound of trucks braking on the interstate. It was a Tuesday morning and the humidity in Georgia was already stifling. My mother Patricia walked out to the parking lot to start her car. It was a 10-year-old sedan, the luxury SUV having been repossessed a year prior. She turned the key. Nothing happened. Just a hollow clicking sound. She tried again, panic rising in her chest. Click, click, click. The alternator was dead. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and let out a sob. She had to get to her job. She was working part-time as a receptionist at a dental clinic, now a job she would have sneered at 3 years ago. If she didn't get there, she wouldn't get paid. And if she didn't get paid, they wouldn't make rent. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over my father's number, but she knew it was useless. Desmond was depressed, spending his days sitting in his recliner watching old sermons on YouTube, pretending he was still a man of influence. He had no money. She scrolled down to Vanessa, her golden child, her pride and joy. Vanessa had married Chad Kensington. Vanessa lived in a mansion in the gated community of Buckhead. Vanessa had married into millions. Surely a few $100s for a car repair was nothing to her. Patricia dialed the number. On the other side of town, in a house that looked like a museum, Vanessa was sitting at her kitchen island. The kitchen was marble and stainless steel, breathtakingly expensive, but Vanessa looked exhausted. She was staring at a grocery receipt, calculating the total on her phone calculator. Her phone rang. She saw Mom on the screen and flinched. She let it ring 3 times before picking up, keeping her voice low. "Hey, Mom, is everything okay, Vanessa?" "Honey?" Patricia's voice was frantic. "I am stuck in the parking lot. The car won't start. The mechanic said it is the alternator. It is going to cost $500. I do not have it until payday next week. Can you Venmo me? I will pay you back, I promise. Just $500. Vanessa felt her stomach drop. $500. To the outside world, she was Mrs. Kensington, the wife of a finance mogul. Her Instagram feed was full of designer bags, brunch dates, and luxury vacations. But the reality inside the mansion was a nightmare of control. Chad didn't give her a bank account. He gave her a credit card, but every single transaction sent a notification to his phone instantly. If she spent $5 at Starbucks, he knew. If she bought groceries, he checked the receipt to make sure she wasn't buying unnecessary items. He called it financial discipline. The law called it financial abuse. She had no cash, not a single dollar. "Mom, I can't right now," Vanessa whispered, looking over her shoulder to make sure the housekeeper wasn't listening. "What do you mean you can't?" Patricia snapped, her stress making her impatient. "You are living in a $5 million house, Vanessa. You posted a photo of a new Gucci bag yesterday. I just need $500 to get to work. Ask Chad." "No. Do not ask." "Chad." Vanessa hissed, her voice rising in panic. "Mom, listen to me. The bag was fake." "Okay. It was a prop for the photo, and I cannot ask Chad for money. We had a fight this morning because I bought the wrong brand of organic milk. He is furious with me. If I ask him for money for you, he will explode." Patricia was stunned. "But he is your husband. We spent our life savings on that wedding, Vanessa. We are living in a dump because we gave you that wedding, and you cannot help me with a car repair." Vanessa felt the walls closing in. The pressure was unbearable. She remembered the wedding too. She remembered the day she felt like a princess. But the princess was now a prisoner. "Mom, stop it!" Vanessa screamed into the phone, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Stop talking about the wedding. It is over. Do not call me asking for money." Chad checks my phone logs. If he sees I'm sending money to you, he will cut off my card completely. I have nothing. Okay, I have $0 in my own name. But, Patricia stammered, confused. You are rich. I am not rich. Vanessa sobbed, her voice breaking. Chad is rich. I am just an employee in his house who sleeps in his bed. I cannot help you. Figure it out yourself. Vanessa hung up the phone and threw it onto the marble counter. It slid across the surface and hit a bowl of lemons. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking. She was trapped. She had married a man exactly like the one she wanted, wealthy, powerful, obsessed with image. And now she was paying the price for her shallowness every single day. Back in the parking lot, my mother stared at her silent phone. The betrayal stung worse than the heat. She looked around at the peeling paint of the apartment complex, at her dead car, at her chipped fingernails. She had bet on the wrong horse. She had invested everything in the pretty popular daughter, thinking it would secure her future. She had thrown away the smart, resilient daughter who would have actually taken care of her. I took another sip of my espresso 300 miles away. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what happened. I knew Chad. I knew his type. And I knew that a foundation built on greed and appearances always cracks eventually. I walked back into my living room and picked up my tablet. I had a notification from my private investigator. It was a photo of my father, Desmond, sitting on a park bench looking lost, and a photo of my mother walking to the bus stop because her car was dead. I felt a twinge in my chest. It wasn't pity. It was simply the recognition of a tragedy. They had created this hell for themselves, brick by brick. And now they had to live in it. I swiped the photos away and opened my email. I had a board meeting in an hour. I had decisions to make. I had a life to live. Their suffering was not my project anymore. It was their curriculum. And the semester was far from over. Because the stroke that was coming for my father wasn't just a medical event. It was the final exam, and they were all about to fail spectacularly. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of gray, humid day that makes your joints ache. Desmond Hill. The man who once prided himself on wearing Italian suits and driving a luxury sedan was standing in the aisle of a discount grocery store called Save a Lot. He was wearing a tracksuit that had seen better days, staring at a jar of pasta sauce. It was on sale for $1.50. He was doing the math in his head, trying to decide if he could afford the name brand or if he had to settle for the generic can on the bottom shelf. This was his life now. Every decision was a calculation. Every purchase was a reminder of how far he had fallen. He reached for the jar, his hand trembling slightly. It was a tremor he had been ignoring for months, just like he ignored the high blood pressure and the dizzy spells. Doctors were expensive. Co-pays were a luxury they could no longer afford since the bankruptcy. As his fingers grasped the glass jar, a sudden blinding flash of white light exploded behind his eyes. It wasn't painful at first. It was just silent. Then came the smell of burnt toast, overpowering and sickening. His left arm, the one holding the sauce, simply stopped receiving instructions from his brain. It went dead. The jar slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the linoleum floor. Red sauce splattered everywhere, looking disturbingly like blood against the white tiles. Desmond tried to apologize. He tried to say, "I will pay for that." But when he opened his mouth, no words came out. Just a garbled, wet sound. The world tilted sideways. The shelves of cereal boxes rushed up to meet him. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, his cheek resting in the puddle of pasta sauce and glass shards. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the scuffed sneaker of a teenager standing over him, filming the old man falling down for TikTok. When Patricia arrived at the hospital, she was hysterical. She had been at work filing dental records when the police called her. She was still wearing her scrubs, which was ironic, because in this terrifying sterile building she had absolutely no power. She was just another frantic wife in a waiting room filled with people who couldn't pay their bills. She paced back and forth, wringing her hands, praying to a God she hadn't genuinely spoken to in years. Please let him be okay. Please do not let him die. We have suffered enough. She didn't realize that the suffering was just beginning. After 3 hours of agonizing silence, a neurosurgeon came out. He looked exhausted and young, too young to be holding her husband's life in his hands. "Mrs. Hill," he said, his voice flat, "your husband has suffered a massive hemorrhagic stroke in the right hemisphere of his brain. The bleeding is severe. We need to perform an emergency craniectomy immediately to relieve the pressure, or he will not survive the night." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest. "Do it!" she screamed. "Save him! What are you waiting for?" "We are preparing the operating room now," the doctor said. "But there is an administrative matter we need to clear up first. I will let the financial counselor explain." He stepped aside, revealing a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard. Her name tag read, "Brenda Patient, Financial Services." Brenda did not look like she saved lives. She looked like she collected debts. "Mrs. Hill." Brenda began, her tone professional but cold. "We ran your husband's insurance card. It is the Bronze Saver plan from United Health, is that correct?" "Yes," Patricia nodded frantically. "It is what we could afford. Just use it." Brenda sighed, tapping her pen on the clipboard. "Here is the problem. This plan has a catastrophic deductible of $15,000. Furthermore, because you downgraded the policy 3 years ago to lower the monthly premium, this plan does not cover neurosurgery at a Tier 1 trauma center like ours. You are out of network." Patricia felt the room spin. Downgraded. She remembered that day. It was 3 years ago. They needed extra cash flow to pay the deposit for the country club for Vanessa's wedding. Desmond had said, "We are healthy, Patty. We do not need the gold plan. Let's switch to the bronze and use the difference for the reception. Vanessa deserves the best." They had traded his brain surgery for a chocolate fountain. "What does that mean?" Patricia whispered, her voice trembling. "It means the insurance is denying the pre-authorization for the surgery," Brenda explained, not looking up from her papers. "The estimated cost for the surgery, the ICU stay, and the first week of recovery is approximately $250,000. $250,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Patricia let out a strangled laugh. "We do not have that. We have maybe $2,000 in the bank." Brenda's expression didn't change. "I understand. However, because this is an elective urgency, and you are out of network, the hospital requires a down payment to proceed with the non-emergency portion of the care. We can do the life-saving surgery to stop the bleeding under the EMTALA Act, but for the ICU bed and the post-op care we need a deposit. Otherwise, once he is stable, we are legally required to transfer him to a state-funded county facility." A state facility. Patricia knew what that meant. It meant a crowded ward with 50 beds in a room. It meant understaffed nurses. It meant waiting hours for pain medication. It meant a slow, undignified death. How much? Patricia asked, tears streaming down her face. "How much is the deposit?" $50,000, Brenda said. "We need a cashier's check or a credit card authorization within the next 2 hours. If not, the transfer paperwork begins the moment he comes out of surgery." $50,000. The exact amount Gabrielle had asked for 3 years ago. The universe was not just cruel, it was a poet. Patricia collapsed onto the plastic chair. She couldn't breathe. $50,000. They didn't have $50 to spare, let alone 50,000. The house was gone. The cars were gone. The retirement fund was gone. It was all gone. Eaten by the wedding, eaten by the image, eaten by the lie. She looked at the clock. She had 2 hours. 2 hours to find a fortune. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She grabbed her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it twice before she could unlock the screen. There was only one person left. One person who had benefited from their sacrifice. One person who was living the high life because they had stripped themselves bare. Vanessa. Or more specifically, Vanessa's husband. Chad Kensington. The golden boy. The finance mogul. The man who drank scotch that cost more than Desmond's insurance premium. Surely Chad would help. He was family. He called Desmond Dad at the wedding. He had toasted to family sticking together. $50,000 was nothing to Chad. It was a rounding error in his bank account. Patricia dialed Vanessa's number first, but it went to voicemail. She couldn't wait. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Chad's number. She had only called him once before to wish him a happy birthday, which he had ignored. She pressed the call button. The ringing sound echoed in her ear, taunting her. Ring. Come on, Chad. Pick up. Ring, please. We gave you everything. We gave you our daughter. We gave you a wedding fit for royalty. Ring. The phone clicked. Hello. Chad's voice was impatient loud. There was background noise, laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of a golf club hitting a ball. He was at the country club. Chad. It is Patricia. Patricia screamed into the phone, not caring that everyone in the waiting room was staring at her. Patricia Hill Desmond. Desmond is in the hospital. He had a stroke. It is bad, Chad. He is dying. There was a pause on the other end. Then a sigh. Oh. That sounds unfortunate, Patricia. Is he going to make it? We do not know, Patricia sobbed. They need to operate. But the insurance? Chad, we messed up the insurance. They need money. They need a deposit, or they are going to throw him into a state home. We need $50,000 right now. Silence. The laughter in the background seemed to get louder. 50,000! Chad repeated his voice, losing all warmth. That is a lot of money, Patricia. I know, but we do not have it, Patricia pleaded. You are the only one who can help. Please, Chad. It is your father-in-law. Just loan it to us. We will pay you back. We will sell the furniture. We will do anything. Just wire the money to the hospital. Please. Patricia held her breath, waiting for the words of salvation, waiting for him to say, "Of course, Mom. I am on it." She clutched the phone like a lifeline, her knuckles white, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was why they made the sacrifices. This was why they chose him, for this moment of safety. But the silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until finally Chad cleared his throat. Patricia. He said, his voice smooth and detached like he was declining a business proposal. You are putting me in a very awkward position. The automatic doors of the emergency room waiting area slid open with a sharp hiss. Patricia leaped from her plastic chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected to see a worried son-in-law rushing to her side, perhaps breathless from running, his face etched with concern for the man he called Dad during his wedding toast. Instead, Chad Kensington strolled in. He was wearing a pristine pastel pink polo shirt and white golf shorts that showed off his tan. He was not running. He was not even walking quickly. He was looking down at his phone, typing a text message with one hand while holding a Starbucks iced coffee in the other. He looked like he was arriving for a casual brunch, not a life-and-death crisis. Vanessa trailed behind him, looking small and terrified. She was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes, clutching her designer bag like a shield. She didn't run to her mother. She stayed 2 steps behind Chad like a trained pet waiting for a command. Patricia rushed forward, grabbing Chad's arm. Her hands were shaking. Chad, thank God you are here. It is a nightmare. The doctors are waiting for the deposit. We only have about 40 minutes left before they initiate the transfer paperwork. If they move him to the state facility in this condition, he will die in the ambulance. You have to help us. Chad stopped walking and looked down at Patricia's hand on his arm. He didn't say anything, but the look of distaste on his face was clear. He gently but firmly peeled her fingers off his sleeve as if he were removing a piece of lint. He took a long, slow sip of his iced coffee, the ice cubes clinking loudly in the silence of the waiting room. Then he checked his Rolex. Patricia? He said, his voice calm and terrifyingly reasonable. You are hysterical. Take a breath. You are making a scene, and quite frankly, it is embarrassing. People are staring. He is dying, Chad. Patricia whispered, her voice cracking. Desmond is dying. We need $50,000. Just write a check. Or give them your card. Please. I will sign whatever you want. I will sign over the car, the furniture, anything. Chad laughed. It was a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. Your car, the one that is 10 years old and currently dead in a parking lot. And your furniture, the stuff you bought at a discount outlet after you sold the house. Patricia, be realistic. You have no collateral. You have nothing to sign over. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice trembling. Chad, please. Just help them. It is my dad. Chad spun around to face his wife. The look in his eyes silenced her instantly. It was a look of pure contempt. Vanessa, shut up, he said softly. Do not interrupt me when I am doing business. And make no mistake, this is a business transaction. Your mother is asking for an unsecured loan of $50,000 for a high-risk medical procedure with zero return on investment. He turned back to Patricia, who was staring at him in horror. Let's look at the facts, Patricia. You and Desmond are broke. You have zero assets. The only reason you are in this mess is because you spent every single dime you had trying to impress my family at the wedding. You wanted the orchids. You wanted the 5-course meal. You wanted to play rich. Well, the party is over. You spent your safety net on champagne. You cannot expect me to refill it just because you failed to plan for your old age. But you are family, Patricia cried out. You said we were one big family. I said a lot of things in my wedding speech. Chad shrugged. That is what you do at weddings. You tell people what they want to hear, but this is the real world. And in the real world, $50,000 is a lot of money to throw into a black hole. He gestured toward the double doors leading to the trauma unit. Look, I Googled it on the way over. A hemorrhagic stroke of this magnitude, even if they operate what is the best-case scenario. He survives, but then what? He will likely be paralyzed. He won't be able to speak. He will need 24-hour nursing care for the rest of his life. Do you have $10,000 a month for a nursing home? No. You do not. So who is going to pay for that? Me. Patricia stood frozen. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She just wanted him to live. So Chad continued stepping closer, lowering his voice so only she and Vanessa could hear. I am going to give you some advice, financial advice, since that is clearly what you lack. Sometimes the most humane thing to do, and certainly the most fiscally responsible thing to do, is to let nature take its course. Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. What are you saying? I am saying, do not pay the deposit, Chad said, checking his watch again. Let them transfer him. If he passes away in the ambulance or at the state facility, it is a mercy. It saves him from a life of being a vegetable. And more importantly, it saves you from bankruptcy. It saves me from having to support a deadbeat father-in-law for the next 20 years. It is a clean break, Patricia. Let him go, you monster, Patricia whispered. You are talking about killing him. I am talking about risk management, Chad corrected, looking bored. I am not a bank, Patricia. I am an investment banker. And this is a bad investment. I am not giving you a dime. He turned to Vanessa. I am going to the car. It smells like sickness and disinfectant in here. You have 5 minutes to say goodbye to your dad or whatever, and then you are coming with me. We have a dinner reservation at 7, and I am not missing it. Chad turned on his heel and walked out the sliding doors, the bright sunlight outside swallowing him up. He didn't look back once. Patricia stood there, shaking, her world collapsing around her. She turned to Vanessa, her beautiful daughter, her golden child, the girl she had sacrificed everything for. Surely Vanessa would scream. Surely Vanessa would run after him and demand he help. Surely Vanessa would pull out her own jewelry and sell it. Vanessa. Patricia sobbed, reaching for her daughter's hand. Did you hear him? He wants your father to die. You have to do something. You have to stand up to him. We need help. Vanessa pulled her hand away, as if her mother burned her. She took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were red, not just from crying but from fear. She looked at the door where Chad had exited, terrified that he might come back and hear them. Then she looked at her mother, and in that moment, the cycle of abuse completed itself. Unable to fight the predator who controlled her, Vanessa turned her teeth on the only victim weaker than herself. "This is your fault, Mom," Vanessa hissed, her voice low and venomous. Patricia blinked, stunned. "What I said, this is your fault," Vanessa screamed, causing a nurse at the front desk to look up. "Why didn't you take better care of him? Why did you let him eat all that junk food? Why didn't you make him exercise? You knew he had high blood pressure. You knew he was a ticking time bomb." "Vanessa, we couldn't afford the medication," Patricia pleaded. "Because you are bad with money," Vanessa shouted, echoing her husband's cruelty. "Chad is right. You guys are a mess. You are always in crisis. And now you are trying to drag me down with you. Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? I have to go back out to the car and apologize to Chad for ruining his afternoon. I have to beg him not to be mad at me. Because of you. But your father—" Patricia wept. "Dad is sick because you failed him as a wife." Vanessa spat out the words, projecting all her self-hatred onto her mother. "And now you want me to destroy my marriage to fix your mistake? No. I am not doing it. I am not asking Chad for anything. If Dad dies, it is because you didn't take care of him. Do not put that on me." Vanessa adjusted her bag on her shoulder, wiping her face aggressively to fix her makeup. "I am leaving," she said coldly. "Do not call me later. I need to decompress. This is too much negative energy." She turned around and walked out, her high heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor, following the path of her husband. She left her mother standing alone in the middle of the waiting room with $50,000 standing between her husband and the grave. Patricia sank into the plastic chair, burying her face in her hands. She realized with a clarity that cut deeper than any surgeon's knife that she had raised a monster. And now the monster was feeding on her. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 30 minutes left. Brenda, the financial counselor, stepped out of her office. She looked at Patricia, then at the empty space where the wealthy family members had just stood. She didn't need to ask what happened. She had seen it 1,000 times. "Mrs. Hill," Brenda asked softly, "do we have the payment?" Patricia looked up. Her eyes were empty. "No," she whispered. "We have nothing." Brenda nodded, her face professional but pitying. "I will prepare the transfer papers. You should go sit with him. It might be a long ride to the county facility." Patricia stood up, her legs feeling like lead. She walked toward the trauma unit doors. But just as she reached for the handle, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. A relentless, steady vibration. She pulled it out, expecting a debt collector, or maybe Vanessa texting to blame her some more. But it wasn't. It was an idea. A desperate, terrifying memory clawing its way up from the back of her mind. Gabrielle. The daughter she had thrown away. The daughter she had burned. The daughter who was supposed to be dead or destitute. But rumors had a way of traveling in their small community. A friend from church had mentioned seeing Gabrielle a year ago driving a nice car. Someone else said she was working in D.C. It was a long shot. It was a humiliating shot. But looking at the closed doors of the trauma unit, Patricia knew she had no pride left to lose. She scrolled through her blocked contacts list, her thumb hovering over the name she hadn't spoken in 3 years. Gabby. She unblocked the number. She pressed call. And as the line began to ring, Patricia Hill prayed that the daughter she had tried to destroy had a shorter memory than she did. The silence in the waiting room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the vending machine in the corner and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor. Patricia sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the double doors of the trauma unit. 30 minutes. That was all the time she had left before her husband, a man who once commanded respect from the pulpit, would be loaded onto a gurney like a sack of unwanted mail and shipped off to the county facility. Brenda, the financial counselor, returned with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was not unkind, but it was final. She stopped in front of Patricia, her heels clicking efficiently. Mrs. Hill, Brenda said, her voice lowered to a professional whisper. I have spoken with the transport team. The ambulance for the county transfer is 20 minutes away. Unless you have secured the $50,000 deposit, I need you to sign these release forms. It acknowledges that you are declining the recommended private care due to financial constraints and accepting the transfer to the state-run facility. Patricia stared at the pen Brenda was holding. Signing that paper felt like signing a death warrant. She knew about the county hospital. Everyone knew about it. It was where the homeless went. It was where the uninsured went. The hallways were lined with patients on stretchers because there were no rooms. The nurse-to-patient ratio was dangerous. Infections were rampant. If Desmond went there in his condition, unable to speak, unable to move, he would be eaten alive. He would die of a bedsore or pneumonia within a month. I cannot sign that, Patricia whispered, shaking her head. He is a man of God. He deserves dignity. Brenda sighed, capping her pen. I understand, Mrs. Hill, but dignity costs money. And right now the hospital has stabilized him. Our legal obligation ends there. We are a private institution, not a charity. You have 20 minutes to find the funds or the transfer happens automatically. I will be at the desk. Brenda walked away, leaving Patricia alone in the plastic chair. The reality of her life crashed down on her. She was 58 years old. She had no husband to protect her, no house to sell, and no money to save him. She looked at Vanessa, who was standing by the window scrolling through her phone, desperate to disassociate from the disaster unfolding in front of her. Vanessa, Patricia hissed. Put the phone away. We have to think. Think about what Vanessa snapped, not looking up. Chad said, No, Mom. I cannot conjure $50,000 out of thin air. And honestly, maybe Chad is right. Maybe it is better this way. The state facility is free, right? At least you won't have bills. Patricia felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded her. This was the child she had pampered. This was the child she had bankrupted herself for. It is not just about the bills, Patricia cried out, keeping her voice low. It is about reputation, Vanessa. If the church finds out your father is rotting in a charity ward, we are finished. We will be social pariahs. Do you want people whispering about how the wealthy Mrs. Kensington let her own father die in a gutter? Because that is exactly what will happen. It will reflect on you too. Vanessa froze. The threat to her image was the only thing that could penetrate her selfishness. She lowered her phone, her eyes widening. Okay, fine, Vanessa said, her voice shrill with panic. But what do you want me to do? I told you I have no access to cash. There has to be another way, Patricia muttered, rubbing her temples frantically. She ran through her mental Rolodex of friends, family, church members. Everyone she knew was either just as broke as she was, or they were fair-weather friends who would stop returning her calls the moment they smelled desperation. Then a thought struck her. It was a small, dusty memory pushed to the back of her mind like an old box in an attic. Gabrielle. Patricia sat up straighter. She hadn't spoken the name in 3 years. Not since the day she uninvited her eldest daughter to the wedding. Not since she gave her that $200 check and told her to disappear, Vanessa, Patricia said slowly, looking at her daughter. What about your sister? Vanessa wrinkled her nose, looking confused. Gabrielle. What about her? She is probably dead, isn't she? We haven't heard from her in forever. No. Patricia shook her head, the gears in her mind turning rapidly. She is not dead. Mrs. Johnson from the choir told me she saw Gabrielle about 6 months ago downtown. She said Gabrielle looked alive. She was walking into an office building. So Vanessa scoffed. She is probably working as a secretary or a receptionist somewhere. It is not like she is a CEO mom. Gabrielle was always the slow one, the screw-up. Remember, she couldn't even keep a job when she got sick. Exactly. Patricia said, her eyes narrowing. She is a secretary, or an assistant, which means she has a job, which means she has a paycheck. And more importantly, she probably has credit cards. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Mom, you are grasping at straws. Even if she has a job, do you think a secretary has $50,000 lying around? Not cash, Patricia said, standing up and pacing. But credit. If she has decent credit, she could take out a loan. Or put the deposit on multiple cards. But why would she help us? Vanessa asked. You kind of kicked her out of the family, remember? Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Oh, please. Gabrielle is weak. She has always been desperate for our approval. Remember how she used to try so hard to please your father? She would do anything for a pat on the head. All we have to do is call her cry a little. Tell her that her daddy is dying and she will come running. She is soft. She won't be able to say no to a dying man. Vanessa considered this, tapping her manicured fingernail against her chin. It was a twisted logic, but it made sense to them. In their minds, Gabrielle was not a person with feelings and boundaries. She was a resource they had temporarily discarded and could now reclaim. Plus, Vanessa added a cruel smile, touching her lips. She probably feels guilty. She missed the wedding. She missed everything. If we play our cards right, we can make her feel like she owes us this. We can tell her this is her chance to redeem herself for being such a burden when she was sick. Yes, Patricia nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. We will tell her that we forgive her. We will tell her that if she pays for this, she can come back into the fold. She is lonely, Vanessa. A girl like that with no husband, no kids, surviving cancer alone. She must be miserable. She's probably sitting in some tiny apartment right now wishing her family would call. We are doing her a favor, really, Vanessa agreed, justifying the exploitation before it even began. We are giving her a purpose. Patricia pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the blocked list. She found the number. It was still there, buried under years of silence and neglect. Okay, Patricia breathed, steeling herself. I am going to call her. But we have to be smart. We cannot let her know we are desperate. We have to sound authoritative. We have to make her feel like it is her duty. Right, Vanessa said, checking her reflection in the glass of the vending machine. Do not let her know I am here with Chad. Just say it is an emergency and she needs to get here with her wallet. If she thinks she is saving the day, she will do it. She has a savior complex. Patricia pressed the button to unblock the contact. Then she pressed call. The ringing sound filled her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings. Patricia held her breath. What if the number was changed? What if she didn't answer? Then the ringing stopped. There was a click, and a voice, cool and unrecognizable, spoke on the other end. Hello? Patricia's heart skipped a beat. It was Gabrielle, but the voice didn't sound like the weeping, sick girl she remembered. It sounded steady. It sounded strong. Gabrielle. Is that you? Patricia asked, forcing her voice to crack, summoning the tears on command. Yes, this is Gabrielle. Who is this? It is Mom. Patricia sobbed, looking at Vanessa and giving her a thumbs up. Oh, Gabby, thank God you picked up. It is your father. It is bad Gabby. He is in the hospital. He had a stroke. He is asking for you. She paused, waiting for the reaction, waiting for the panic, waiting for the daughter who used to beg for their love to come rushing back. There was a silence on the other end, a long, calculating silence. He is asking for me. Gabrielle's voice was flat. Or is he asking for my money? Patricia froze. She hadn't expected that. She expected tears. She expected compliance. She didn't expect a direct hit. What? No. How can you say that? Patricia cried, ramping up the drama. He is dying, Gabrielle. The insurance won't cover the surgery. They are going to throw him out on the street. We just need a little help with the deposit. You are his daughter. Do you want his blood on your hands? She looked at Vanessa, mouthing the words. She is resisting. Vanessa grabbed the phone. Give it to me. Vanessa put the phone to her ear, her voice dripping with condensation. Look, Gabrielle, stop being a brat. We know you are probably working some desk job and living in a studio apartment, but this is real life. Dad is in the ER. We need you to come down here and put the deposit on your credit card. We will pay you back eventually. Just get in your car and come. Unless you are still the same selfish person you were 3 years ago. Patricia watched Vanessa nodding encouragement. Yes, bully her. Shame her. That was how they had always controlled Gabrielle. They assumed she was still the same broken bird they had kicked out of the nest. They had no idea that while they were busy falling apart, she had learned how to fly. And they certainly had no idea that the desk job she had was sitting in the corner office of a multi-million-dollar company, and the credit card they wanted was a black card with no limit. They thought they were calling a victim. They didn't realize they had just rung the doorbell of the executioner. The clock on the wall of the trauma center waiting room ticked loudly each second, marking the countdown to Desmond Hill's transfer to the state facility. Patricia sat on the edge of the hard plastic chair, shredding a tissue in her lap. Her eyes darted between the entrance and her phone. 10 minutes. They had 10 minutes left. She had called Gabrielle 20 minutes ago. Where was she? Patricia imagined her eldest daughter navigating the city bus system, or perhaps driving that old, unreliable sedan she used to have. She pictured Gabrielle rushing in, disheveled, apologetic, and most importantly, compliant. Vanessa stood by the vending machine, angrily punching buttons to get a diet soda. She was muttering to herself, furious that her evening had been ruined, furious that Chad had left her, and furious that she was stuck in a hospital smelling of antiseptic instead of dining at a 5-star restaurant. She checked her reflection in the glass of the machine, fixing a stray hair. Even in a crisis, vanity was her primary reflex. Then the sound changed. The low hum of the waiting room, the coughing, the crying, the murmuring of televisions was sliced through by a sharp, rhythmic sound. Click, clack, click, clack. It was the sound of hard-soled shoes striking linoleum with absolute purpose. It wasn't the shuffle of a patient nor the squeak of a nurse's sneaker. It was the sound of authority. The automatic double doors at the main entrance slid open not sluggishly, but as if they were parting for royalty. Patricia looked up, expecting to see a doctor or perhaps a hospital administrator coming to deliver bad news. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A woman walked through the doors. She was flanked by 2 men in dark suits. To her left was a tall man carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy with importance. To her right was a younger man holding a tablet and typing furiously as he walked, matching her stride perfectly. But it was the woman in the center who commanded the gravity of the room. She was wearing a black pantsuit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. It wasn't off the rack. It was Armani. The fabric absorbed the harsh hospital lights, rather than reflecting them, a matte black armor that screamed power. Under the blazer, she wore a crisp white silk blouse that rippled like water when she moved. She wore oversized black sunglasses that hid her eyes completely, making her expression unreadable. Her hair, once the source of so much shame when it fell out in clumps, was now a sleek, sharp bob that framed her face like a helmet of obsidian. And the shoes. The source of the terrifying rhythm. They were black stilettos with the signature red bottom of Christian Louboutin. Every step she took was a declaration of war against the floor she walked on. The entire waiting room went silent. People stopped scrolling on their phones. A crying baby even seemed to hush. Everyone watched this trio move through the space, assuming a celebrity or a politician had just arrived. Patricia squinted. There was something familiar about the way the woman held her head high, a posture of defiance she hadn't seen in years. But no, it couldn't be. The Gabrielle she knew hunched her shoulders. The Gabrielle she knew wore cardigans from discount bins to hide her body. This woman walked like she owned the building and was considering evicting everyone in it. Vanessa turned away from the vending machine, her soda forgotten. She stared at the woman's bag. It was resting in the crook of her arm. A black Hermes Birkin bag with gold hardware. Vanessa knew bags. She studied them in magazines. She knew that bag cost more than the car she drove. She knew there was a 2-year waiting list just to be interviewed to buy one. The trio didn't stop at the reception desk. They walked straight toward where Patricia and Vanessa were standing, as if guided by a radar lock. The woman stopped 5 feet away from them. The two men behind her stopped in unison, like a well-drilled military unit. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Patricia stood up slowly, her legs trembling. "Excuse me?" she stammered, intimidated by the sheer wealth radiating off this stranger. "We are waiting for family." The woman reached up with a manicured hand. Her nails were painted a deep blood red. She gripped the frames of her sunglasses and slowly, deliberately pulled them off. Patricia gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. The eyes staring back at her were cold, dark, and utterly familiar. They were the same eyes that had looked at her with pleading desperation 3 years ago. But the pleading was gone. It had been replaced by a glacier. "Gabrielle." Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. Is that you?" Gabrielle didn't smile. She didn't rush forward to hug her mother. She didn't ask about her father. She simply looked at Patricia, then scanned her eyes over to Vanessa, dissecting them with a surgical gaze. She took in their disheveled appearances, their fear, the cheap clothes her mother was wearing, the panic in Vanessa's eyes. "Hello, Mother," Gabrielle said. Her voice was smooth, low, and terrifyingly calm. "You said it was an emergency." Vanessa stepped forward, her mouth hanging open. She looked from Gabrielle's face down to the Birkin bag, then to the red-bottomed shoes, and finally to the two men standing behind her like bodyguards. Her brain couldn't process it. It broke her worldview. Gabrielle was the loser. Gabrielle was the scapegoat. Gabrielle was the sick one. If Gabrielle was this queen, then what was Vanessa? Sister Vanessa stuttered, her voice shrill. "What is going on? Why do you look like that?" Gabrielle raised an eyebrow, a microscopic movement that conveyed volumes of disdain. "Like what, Vanessa?" "Like rich." Vanessa blurted out, her jealousy overriding her tact. "Where did you get that bag? Is that a Hermes? It has to be fake. You got it on Canal Street, right? There is no way you can afford a real Birkin. You are a secretary." The man on Gabrielle's left, the one with the briefcase, stepped forward slightly. His voice was deep and baritone. "Ms. Hill is the CEO and founder of OmniHealth Solutions. I am her legal counsel, Mr. Sterling. And I can assure you nothing about Miss Hill is fake." Vanessa recoiled as if slapped. CEO, founder, OmniHealth. She had seen that company name on the news. They had just been acquired by a tech giant. Patricia felt the room spin. CEO. Her daughter was a CEO. The daughter she had thrown away was a millionaire. A billionaire, maybe. And here Patricia stood begging for $50,000. Gabrielle silenced her lawyer with a small wave of her hand. She looked at Vanessa, her gaze lingering on the fake designer bag Vanessa was clutching. "It is real," Vanessa, Gabrielle said softly. "Just like the cancer was real. Just like your abandonment was real. Everything in my life is authentic. Can you say the same?" Vanessa turned beet red, hiding her bag behind her back. Gabrielle turned her attention back to Patricia. "You called me because you need money. $50,000 for a deposit. Is that correct?" Patricia nodded frantically, tears spilling over again. "Yes. Yes, Gabby. It is your father. He is in there. They are going to move him. Please. You have the money. I can see you have the money. Help him. He is your daddy." Gabrielle looked at the trauma unit doors. For a second, a flicker of something human passed over her face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the steel mask of a negotiator. "I am not here as a daughter," Gabrielle said, her voice cutting through Patricia's sobbing. "I am here as a solitary entity who makes investment decisions. You asked for a transaction, so let's treat it like one." She snapped her fingers. The assistant on her right stepped forward and handed her a black folder. "Where is he?" Gabrielle asked. "He is in trauma room 4. Patricia sniffled, wiping her nose. "But they won't let us in without the payment." Gabrielle didn't wait for permission. She started walking toward the secure doors. The nurse at the station stood up to block her. "Ma'am, you cannot go back there," the nurse started to say. Gabrielle didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She simply turned her head slightly to the nurse. "My name is Gabrielle Hill. I am the donor who just funded your new MRI wing. Check your system." The nurse froze. She typed something quickly into her computer. Her eyes widened. She sat back down immediately. "Go right ahead, Ms. Hill. Room 4. Gabrielle pushed through the doors, her heels clicking echoing down the sterile hallway. Patricia and Vanessa scrambled to follow her, trotting like puppies behind a wolf, terrified and hopeful all at once. They thought they had won. They thought the checkbook was opening. They didn't realize that Gabrielle wasn't walking into that room to save a life. She was walking in to deliver a eulogy for their relationship. The automatic doors of the trauma unit hissed shut behind us, sealing off the noise of the general waiting room. The air inside here was different. It was colder, sharper smelling of high-grade disinfectant and adrenaline. My heels clicked rhythmically on the pristine white tiles, a sound that seemed to announce my arrival before I even turned the corner. Behind me, I could hear the shuffling footsteps of my mother and sister, along with the heavier tread of Chad, who had decided to follow us the moment he realized I was not the same destitute woman he remembered. We walked past nurses' stations where staff were frantically typing on computers or rushing with bags of IV fluid, but as I passed, heads turned. They didn't look at me with the pity they reserve for grieving relatives. They looked at me with the deference they reserve for hospital administrators or major donors. My assistant Marcus walked a half step behind me, already pulling up the digital files on his tablet, ready to execute whatever command I gave. As we approached Trauma Room 4, a man in a white coat stepped out. He was not a resident or a junior doctor. He was an older man with silver hair and an air of absolute authority. It was Dr. Richard Sterling, the chief of surgery and the director of the hospital. I had met him 6 months ago at a charity gala where I wrote a check that covered the new pediatric oncology wing. Dr. Sterling looked up from his chart. When his eyes landed on me, his professional mask melted into a warm, genuine smile. He bypassed the nurses, bypassed the security guard, and certainly bypassed my trailing family members, to walk straight toward me with his hand extended. "Ms. Hill," he said, his voice booming with respect. "I was alerted by security that you were in the building, but I did not expect to see you down here in the trenches." I stopped and took his hand, shaking it firmly. "It is good to see you, Richard. I apologize for the unannounced visit. I understand you are treating a patient in room 4. Desmond Hill." Dr. Sterling nodded gravely. "Yes, Mr. Hill. Yes, Mr. We have him stabilized for the moment, but the situation is precarious. We were preparing the transfer papers for the county facility due to the insurance blockage. I had no idea he was connected to you." "He is my father," I said simply, my face betraying no emotion. The silence that followed that statement was deafening. I could feel my mother Patricia holding her breath behind me. I could feel Vanessa shrinking against the wall. They were watching the most powerful man in the hospital treat their outcast daughter like royalty. Dr. Sterling's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly. "I see. Well, that changes the conversation entirely. We certainly would not want the father of our most generous benefactor to receive anything less than world-class care. Ms. Hill, I cannot thank you enough for the robotic surgical arms you donated last quarter. My team used them just this morning to save a 6-year-old girl. You are changing lives here. We are honored to serve your family," he continued, gesturing toward the glass doors of the room. "Please, go in." I stepped forward, and the electronic glass doors slid open. Inside, the room was filled with beeping monitors. In the center of the chaos lay my father Desmond. He looked small. The man who used to terrorize us with his booming voice and his demands for perfection was now a withered figure under a thin white sheet. Half of his face was slack, pulled down by gravity and the stroke, but his eyes were open. He was looking at the ceiling, confused and frightened. When I walked into his line of sight, his good eye focused on me. At first, there was no recognition. He saw a woman in a black power suit with a severe haircut, but then I took off my sunglasses completely. Desmond's eye widened. A gurgling sound came from his throat. He tried to lift his good hand, reaching out toward me. It was a pathetic, trembling movement. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He saw the clothes. He saw the doctor hovering respectfully at my shoulder. He saw the power. And then he saw the hope. I could read his mind as clearly as if he were speaking. He was thinking, "She made it. She is rich. She can pay. I am saved." The arrogance was still there even in his condition. He didn't see a daughter he had wronged. He saw a walking ATM. Before I could say a word to him, a shadow fell over me. It was Chad. My brother-in-law, the man who had just told my mother to let her husband die because it was a bad investment, pushed past Vanessa and Patricia. He practically leaped into the room, bringing with him the smell of expensive cologne and desperation. He adjusted his pink polo shirt and flashed a smile that was all teeth and panic. He looked at Dr. Sterling, then at the expensive equipment in the room, and finally at me. He did the mental math instantly. The hospital director knew my name. I had donated millions. I was a whale. "Gabrielle," Chad exclaimed, his voice dripping with fake warmth. He extended his hand, trying to bridge the gap between us, trying to erase the last 3 years of silence and insults. "Wow, look at you," he continued, chuckling nervously. "I told Vanessa just the other day," I said. "I wonder what Gabrielle is up to. I always knew you were the smart one. You know, real estate and finance run in the family, right? It takes a genius to spot a genius." He was sweating. I could see the beads of perspiration on his forehead. He was terrified that I would mention his earlier comments to the doctor. He was terrified that his wife would realize he was a fraud compared to me. But mostly he was terrified that he had bet on the wrong horse. I looked down at his extended hand. I didn't take it. I looked at it as if he were holding a dead rat. Chad kept his hand there for a second too long, then awkwardly pulled it back, wiping his palm on his shorts. "Listen, Gabby," Chad stammered, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Things are really crazy right now. The old man, he is in bad shape. And you know how it is with cash flow. The market is down. My assets are tied up in long-term bonds. We are a little illiquid at the moment. But since you are here and you clearly have done well for yourself, we are family, right? We stick together." He winked. He actually winked at me. "You can handle this deposit, right?" Chad pressed his eyes, darting to the doctor to make sure he was witnessing this family reunion. "It is pocket change for a player like you. Step up for the family. Be the hero. Vanessa misses you. We all miss you." I looked past him to Vanessa, who was standing in the doorway. She wasn't smiling. She was staring at me with a mixture of awe and pure, unadulterated jealousy. She looked at my skin, clear and glowing. She looked at my assistant typing on his iPad. She looked at the way the hospital staff orbited around me. She realized in that moment that all her trips to the Maldives and her leased BMWs were nothing but costume jewelry compared to the diamond I had become. I turned back to Chad. My expression didn't change. I didn't frown. I didn't scowl. I simply looked at him with absolute indifference. "Who are you?" I asked calmly. Chad's smile faltered. "What? It is me. Chad, your brother-in-law." I turned to Dr. Sterling. "Richard, who is this person? Is he hospital staff?" Dr. Sterling shook his head, sensing the tension immediately. "I do not believe so, Ms. Hill." "I see," I said, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. "I prefer a sterile environment when I am making decisions. Please have security remove non-essential personnel from the room. It is crowded in here, and the smell of desperation is overwhelming." Chad's face turned a violent shade of red. "But, Gabby, we are family. I am Vanessa's husband." I turned my back on him, facing my father. I could hear the security guard stepping forward. "Sir, you need to step out," the guard said firmly. Chad sputtered, looking at Patricia for help, but my mother was too busy staring at me like I was a religious apparition. Chad was forced to back out of the room, his ego bruised, his attempt at manipulation crushed in under 30 seconds. Now it was just me, the doctor, my silent mother, and the man lying in the bed, who had once told me I wasn't worth the cost of chemotherapy. Desmond let out a low moan, reaching for me again. His eyes were wet. He was pleading. He was begging. He thought the hard part was over. He thought the check was being written. I stepped closer to the bed. I leaned down so that my face was inches from his. I smelled the antiseptic soap and the faint metallic scent of blood. "Hello, Dad," I whispered. "You look like you are in a lot of trouble." He blinked rapidly, trying to nod. I stood up and turned to Dr. Sterling. "Richard, what is the exact amount required to prevent the transfer to the county facility?" $50,000 for the initial deposit, Dr. Sterling answered, and another $200,000 estimated for the full course of private recovery. I nodded slowly. $250,000, $250,000. I have that amount in my checking account right now, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. I could write a check this second, and it would clear before the ink dried. My mother let out a sob of relief. "Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Gabby. I knew you would save us. I knew you had a good heart." I held up a hand to silence her. "I didn't say I was going to write it, Mother. I said I could." The room went deadly silent again. The hope in Desmond's eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden dawning terror. I turned to my assistant. "Marcus, bring me the file." "The blue one." Marcus stepped forward and handed me a thin blue folder. It wasn't a checkbook. It was an old wrinkled piece of paper that had been taped back together. I walked to the foot of the bed. I opened the folder. Inside was the invoice from the oncology clinic 3 years ago. The one for my first round of chemotherapy. The one that was rejected by insurance. The one my father had refused to pay because he needed to buy orchids for a wedding. I pulled the paper out. It was yellowed with age. "I remember a conversation we had at the dinner table, Dad," I said, my voice conversational, almost light. "I asked you for help. I told you I was dying. And do you remember what you said?" Desmond stared at me, his chest heaving. "You said that the wedding was a priority." I continued. "You said that the money was allocated for the future of the family. You chose a party over my life." I held the invoice up so he could see it clearly. "I survived because I learned a lesson from you that night," I said. "I learned that investments should only be made where there is a return. And looking at you right now, I see a very bad investment." "Gabrielle, no," my mother screamed, lunging forward. "You cannot do this. He is your father, security doctor." Sterling barked, and the guard held my mother back. I didn't flinch. I looked deep into my father's terrified eye. "You want the best care, Dad? You want the private room? You want the dignity?" He blinked, tears rolling down his paralyzed cheek. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Then you should have invested in the daughter who would be standing here today. But you didn't. You invested in the one who is currently standing in the hallway checking her makeup." I turned to Dr. Sterling. "Doctor, I will not be providing the deposit. You may proceed with the transfer to the county facility." The sound that came from my mother was a primal scream of anguish. Desmond's monitor started beeping rapidly as his heart rate spiked in panic. But I wasn't done. I had one last message to deliver, a message 4 words long. My mother, Patricia, let out a strangled sob and lunged for the side of the hospital bed. She grabbed the metal railing with both hands and tried to physically shove the heavy bed closer to me as if proximity would change my mind. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure desperation. "Gabrielle, please look at him," she wailed. "He is your father. He is your flesh and blood. You are our only hope. You are the only one who can save us. Do not let him die because of a grudge. We are family." I watched her hysterics with the same detached interest one might have for a bad soap opera. I did not move back. I stood my ground. Slowly and deliberately, I reached for the gold latch on my black Hermes bag. The sound of the latch clicking open was loud in the silent room. I saw Vanessa gasp. I saw Chad lean forward, his greedy eyes lighting up. I saw the relief wash over my mother's face. They thought they had won. They thought that underneath the expensive suit and the cold exterior, I was still the same desperate little girl who craved their approval. They thought I was reaching for my checkbook. I reached into the bag. My fingers brushed past my leather wallet and wrapped around a single folded piece of paper that I had carried with me for 3 years. I pulled it out. It was not a check. It was an invoice. The paper was yellowed with age and soft at the creases where it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. I smoothed it out on the sterile metal tray table next to my father's head. He looked at it. His good eye widened in recognition. "Do you know what this is?" "Dad," I asked, my voice soft and deadly. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. It was the bill for my very first round of chemotherapy. The date was stamped in red ink 3 years ago. The total amount due was $3,000. $3,000, I repeated. That was the price of my life back then. "I begged you for it. I stood in your dining room and begged you to help me stay alive. And do you remember what you told me?" Desmond let out a gurgling sound, tears streaming down his face. "You told me that your money was tied up," I said, answering for him. "You told me that Vanessa's wedding was the priority. You told me that you had to maintain the family image." I leaned down close. I got close enough to see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. I got close enough to smell the fear radiating off him. I looked over my shoulder at Vanessa, who was trembling in the corner. Then I looked at Chad, who was staring at the floor. Finally, I locked eyes with my father. "You made a choice, Dad," I whispered. "You took all your assets and you invested them in a party. You bet on that wedding instead of betting on me. So now that you are dying and you need a return on your investment, I suggest you look elsewhere." I leaned right next to his ear so that my voice would vibrate in his skull. "Call your wedding planner." I pulled back and saw the light fade from his eyes as the realization hit him. "Maybe she can refund you for the imported orchids," I said, straightening my blazer. "Maybe the DJ can give you back the money for the first dance. You spent your life savings on that day, so let that day save you now. Because I certainly will not." The silence that followed my final 4 words was shattered by the sound of my mother's scream. It was a raw, animalistic sound of pure despair that echoed off the tiled walls of the trauma unit. She lunged for me again, her hands clawing at the air, trying to grab my blazer, trying to grab the checkbook she believed was her birthright. But she never reached me. The security guard stepped in front of her, blocking her path with his broad shoulders. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply turned on my heel and began to walk away. Behind me, I heard the chaos unfold. I heard the heart monitor attached to my father's spike into a frantic rhythm as the reality of his fate crashed down on him. I heard Dr. Sterling giving calm orders to his staff to prepare the transfer papers immediately. I heard Vanessa sobbing not for her father, but for the humiliation of the scene. And I heard Chad talking loudly into his phone, likely calling his lawyer to distance himself from the disaster. I walked down the long white corridor, my assistants matching my pace. I did not look back, not when I reached the double doors, not when I walked through the lobby, not even when I stepped out into the cool night air and got into the back of my waiting town car. As the driver pulled away, leaving the hospital behind, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I had been carrying for 3 years. The cord was cut, the debt was paid. The fallout happened exactly as I predicted. Gravity always wins in the end. My father, Desmond, was transferred that same night to the county facility. It is a grim brick building on the south side of the city, known for its overcrowding and underfunding. There are no private rooms there. He lies in a ward with 10 other men, separated only by thin beige curtains that do not block the sounds of coughing or crying. The nurses there are overworked and underpaid. They do their best, but they do not have time to fluff pillows or listen to stories about the good old days. Desmond Hill. The man who needed to be the king of his castle is now just patient number 459. He spends his days staring at the water stains on the ceiling, unable to speak, unable to move, and unable to escape the consequences of his own arrogance. My mother Patricia learned the hard way that dignity does not pay the rent. With Desmond in state care and their debts mounting, she had to take the only job she could find that would hire a 58-year-old woman with no recent work history. She works as a night shift janitor at a shopping mall. The same mall where she used to shop for designer clothes, she now scrubs the toilets and mops the floors. Her manicured nails are gone, replaced by chapped hands and broken skin. Every night as she pushes her heavy cleaning cart past the windows of the expensive stores, she catches her reflection in the glass. She sees a woman who traded her daughter for an image and ended up with nothing but a mop bucket. And then there is Vanessa, the golden child, the princess. Her fall was the swiftest of all. 2 days after the scene at the hospital, she came home to find the locks changed on the mansion in Buckhead. Chad did not even have the decency to tell her to her face. He had his personal assistant hand her a manila envelope through the gate. Inside were the divorce papers. Chad cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the truth. He had realized that the Hill family was a liability, and Chad Kensington did not do liabilities. Vanessa tried to fight it. She tried to claim half of his assets. She tried to claim alimony. But she had been so eager to marry him, so eager to secure the ring, that she had signed the prenuptial agreement without reading the fine print. The clause was ironclad. In the event of a divorce, lasting less than 5 years, she walked away with nothing but the personal items she brought into the marriage. Since she had brought nothing, she left with nothing. She lost the car. She lost the jewelry. She lost the status. She is currently sleeping on a blow-up mattress in a studio apartment she shares with 2 college students, trying to restart a life she never bothered to build for herself. As for me, life looks very different now. It is a Friday night 3 months later. I am sitting at a long wooden table on the patio of a bakery in a quiet neighborhood. The air smells of yeast and vanilla. Sitting across from me is Elena, the nurse who saved me when I was homeless. She is wearing a chef's apron covered in flour, and her face is glowing with happiness. Next to her are her 2 children eating pastries that they baked themselves in the industrial ovens I bought for them. This bakery is hers. It is the dream she told me about when I was sleeping on her couch. Now, it is real. Around the table are a few others. My assistant Marcus, who has become my right-hand man. A couple of friends I made in my cancer support group. This is my family. We do not share blood. We share something stronger. We share loyalty. We share respect. We share the knowledge that love is a verb, not a transaction. Elena pours a bottle of wine into simple glass tumblers. She raises her glass and looks at me with tears in her eyes. To new beginnings, she says softly. I raise my glass. To family, I reply. And this time when I say the word, it does not taste like poison. It tastes like freedom. I take a sip of the wine. It is rich and warm. I look out at the streetlights flickering on and I smile. The screen fades to black, but my story is just getting started. This story teaches us that your value as a human being is never determined by how much you can provide to others, even if those others are your parents. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Gabrielle's journey proves that the greatest revenge is not harm, but massive success and the ability to walk away from toxicity without looking back. It reminds us that when we are stripped of everything, we find out who we truly are, and sometimes the people who abandoned us in our winter do not deserve to sit with us in our summer. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own peace, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to know that it is okay to choose yourself. Remember, you are the author of your own life, and it is never too late to write a new chapter where you win. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.